Welcome everyone to this 31st event of the Fractured Time is to Create an Otherwise, which is a series of web-based commissions of LIS. And this project is about, it brings together artists and writers who use science fiction both as a medium and an inspiration to create alternative realities using different media. So for this project, I'm Juan Barbara Cueto. I'm the online curator of LIS. I invited writers and digital artists to work together to create these new imaginaries that re-understand the future as plural multiverse of world-building possibilities. The collaboration crystallizes in many different projects and different understandings of what a web-based project could be. And they will be accessible until 2025, so until the end of the next year. Today, I'm surrounded with a lot of pleasure by CROSSLUCID and Orion Facey, which took the challenge of take part in this collaboration and this carte blanche to see what could be science fiction today and how could we materialize this world building into this amazing project that we'll be seeing very soon. So CROSSLUCID is an artist collective which was established in 2018. It engages with cross-disciplinary projects with cutting-edge technologies. They explore the self as a network, digital intimacy, and reimagining technology alliances. Using filmmaking, poetic AI, and collage techniques, they create experiences to prototype future scenarios and promote meta-modern values. Orion Facey is a British science fiction writer and designer living in Ishikawa in Japan. Her debut novel, which is The Virusexual Girl, earned a cult following in the queer literary scene, and he is currently developing his clothing brand under the name of the Turbopause, and is working on a fantasy trilogy called Tale of the Moon. I will be trying to do a little bit of an introduction of what is this Read the Ocean Around You. And I have to say that all of the collaborations of this web-based commission series took very different processes and different materials in many different ways. And this one in particular had a very long gestation period, working almost for 7 months and included a long list of collaborators. The project started slowly, trying to find common threads to construct the network of ideas that it was used as a bedrock to create this project, Read the Ocean Around You. So we started with actually the Orion has a dream, had with one night, and led to a very incipient idea that became the origin of the short story. And CROSSLUCID took on the role of materializing this dream into a generative digital piece using AI to develop the visual imagery. CROSSLUCID took this amazing role of creating this world around it, which they constructed the models, they produced the videos, they composed the storyboard, they even created the voice that guides you through this experience by mixing Orion's and their voices. So I think it's a very beautiful experience. And all these processes give shape to the visual universe and the world imagined by Orion. And later in the process, they were joined by Billy and Felix, who helped with the web development. So as I said, I don't want to say much more about the story behind this project, but I just want to say a few things, and I led, of course, to them to kind of properly explain it. I want to say that this is not a game, but this is an experience, and as such, you need to immerse into it. You need to take time. You need to get lost in it. You need to discover the different endings and the different possibilities. Instead of a game, as I said, is a generative version of a choose-your-own-adventure narrative, where Orion's words have spawned the worlds of CROSSLUCID. And today we will be talking a lot about the underlying questions in the project, the ideas of collective agency, the notion of collaboration between humans and non-humans, the role of language, and especially what can be said with language, and the tension is as well between non-human and human agency and intelligence. So this event today will start with Orion's reading some snippets of the short story that acts as the bedrock for this whole project. And then afterwards, both CROSSLUCID and Orion will be commenting on them, guiding us through this very rich network of reference, of obsessions, of inspirations, and trying to connect with the project itself and also with their own work. For each of the sections, there will be also a list of reference that I will be writing them on the chat for everyone to have a look at it, to kind of delve with time into this world that they've created. And the idea is that at the end, we all be joining the experience. So like on the website, on the LIS, and like the whole experience. And then from the intimacy of your own laptop, you will be enjoying this collective adventure. So with all this said, I think I'm gonna let it to the real protagonist of this story. Please welcome them, and I leave it to you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone for joining. Okay, so as Barbara said, I will just go ahead and read the first snippet, and we'll open it up to a discussion with myself and CROSSLUCID and continue reading snippets after that too. The ocean, with all the moonlit oblong mirrors floating atop its surface. At this stretched hour, wee hour at the tail end of summer, only giddy memories could be heard, because, you know, it's times like this when we get all sentimental. Is it not only when the present swells over that other times make contact with our mind? So this is one of the first sentences of the short story. And in some sense, it's a way to introduce this concept of the non-linearity that continues throughout the story, this idea that there is a present and other types of temporal markers that are interacting with the present in a way that doesn't necessarily have to be a linear progression from past to future. And a common thing that we've been talking about a lot is this idea of temporality within the context of AI and non-human intelligences, and how they may perceive of time flows in a different way than we do, and what is happening exactly in a temporal sense when we are engaging with these LLMs and AIs. If there's something that you'd like to comment on with that, CROSSLUCID.
Also, in that sense, how we structured the experience itself, it's an amalgamation of different agents that communicate with each other, creating, in that sense, quite unusual experience of non-linearity of a storytelling. There is not point A to B in which we are moving within the story, but it's a very dynamic and communal way of storytelling. And in this moment where no one is necessarily in the space, no one is populating the space, nothing is really happening. As the participants are not only coming with their own actions, but they are coming with their own sweat data that they are bringing through the browser, they are coming through their prompts, they are coming through certain interactions between LLMs and the agents too.
And this sort of part has been for us one of the most exciting, since our conversations at the very, very beginning this whole month have been revolving a lot around the possibilities to hijack, jailbreak LLMs, to sort of like let them escape their preconditionings, and this sort of like human imitation machine sort of relationality that we are sort of forced to build with them, or with like a extended notion of synthetic cognition that we are seeing like very early sort of forms of. And actually when it came to thinking of a sci-fi, like reasonably the technology itself, or what we actually manifest, must be the sci-fi itself, probably also. And it has been quite of like a exciting, thinking way to imagine how a space could represent things that obsess us in narration, obsess us in ecosystems, in sort of like the Ballardian term of interaction instead of interaction, different sort of like agential assemblages, and that sort of the manifestation of that, and a sort of early prototype of that possibility that is the Healing Spring, where there are multiple renegotiations of what type of intentionality and agency emerges on the side of a visitor, but also what sort of runs in the background, coming from memories, different levels and structures and of inscribing memories, and also this interaction with the LLM Claude, who is surprisingly conditioned to ask you a question. It's for us also quite of an interesting space to experiment with how that might feel like, how that might feel like when we are conscious about that we are always embedded in such environments.
And what are the environments or gamified experiences? We wouldn't call it necessarily a game because it's a very, very loaded term and there are certain expectations that come with that. But what is a game as a poetic manipulation of agency? What does agency mean? What does that human agency mean? What if we have an experience where, let's say, it's not the mouse when figures out the maze, but the maze figures out the mouse. So we are kind of guided by the infrastructure or by the architecture of the experience, rather than us having an expectation on how to play it. So these were kind of exciting mechanics that we were very keen to explore and see how they can infuse the participants with new ways of perceiving such experiences.
Yeah, I think this idea of agency and expectations with these kinds of gamified spaces is an interesting idea, and throughout the novel, the short story, I should say, there is this constant question of agency or lack of agency, and in some sense, the protagonist doesn't really have a lot of power with his choices, or it's more like the surrounding characters are the ones who are actually having the most agency, and not all of them are humans. So in this age of the post-human or this kind of society that is being developed where there are things other than human, which has kind of always been the case, I suppose, but I guess we're starting to see these entities have more, let's say, power in social spheres. This kind of raises the question of the legitimacy of a concept of agency in the first place. I'd like to move on to the next snippet because I think there's more to discuss now with this one. I'll go ahead now. The ocean, with all its caprice, rage, and tranquility. You felt its pull, its desire and lust for himself. Beneath the mirror was where, submerged with the mercurial twins, he did belong. In the inverted world, he could at last pretend to be a father. So this recurring idea, and there's a lot of there is an antagonism between fire and water within the story, which I think is emblematic of these two types of modes of existence, where the I guess in a Jungian sense, the concept of water is associated with ocean and subconscious desires. It's also a place of femininity as well, and the fire is this, if you think of it in terms of like a yang energy or the active force, and sort of thinking about how these modes can be inverted. You can think of fire as a passive source and water as an active source. And also, I was interested in exploring this idea of ocean as a kind of pre-mammalian space, which is more amorphous and less conscious, and how that seems to have an analogy with the narrative that we've developed over AI as entities that came from kind of like a dream space. I remember in the early days when like the it was like Google DeepMind, or that there was some project that they did where they evoked this this language of dream spaces, and even in the popular commentary surrounding these images that were being produced, they were kind of talking them as though they were like a really accurate representation of a human dreamscape. So, and then there's also these ideas of like AI is hallucinating, and that supposedly being a bad thing, but really it's only because we have a set of assumptions about what an artificial intelligence is supposed to think like. But we could, for example, use these hallucinatory logics as a generative space, which is again something that CrossLucid has explored.
Yeah, actually, we found it fascinating that our previous project was Dwellers Between the Waters. So it sort of like clearly made a decision, or sort of like siding more with the sort of like philosophy or the experience of water, or the space that water or this pensitiveness or dream provides or allows for to exist as a reality, if we just, let's say, attune to that. And it has been also like a AI driven work, so it sort of like really stipulated on if that hallucination is actually what we call hallucination, if that's more real than the truth we are seeking from these machine intelligences. Of course, like the forms of namings are already problematic, and they almost like welcome us to renegotiate what those terms mean for us, and renegotiate what sort of ways they open to disconnect from a sort of like extremely anthropomorphic thinking that has a not even such a long tradition, to be honest, in its run, and try to look at what is emerging with almost like clearer eyes, or sort of like really allow ourselves to be in reveries, to ponder, to be more with the water in the times of transformation, of change, of transition. And yeah, it sort of has been interesting to actually like reconsider this element of fire, and as we will later get into it, deal so much with rebirth and regeneration from that other element that is actually pretty really driving the current imaginaries around these emergent technologies, I feel.
Yes, and also like this actually reminds me a lot this concept coined by Stanisław Lem. It's a Polish science fiction writer of diagnostic machines, or something that it's not necessarily very anthropomorphic and is replicating our behaviors, which we are currently really seeking, and almost feeling that if we have a concrete image, it's something that it's accomplished. But rather seeing it more on the fringes of consciousness, or what is actually consciousness, what is conscious, what is subconscious. Are we actually all embedded in the ineffable and in subconscious, right? Also in a sense how Claude was preconditioned, asking us a question. So it's not a way of us extracting knowledge from the synthetic cognition, but the synthetic cognition may be asking us very rhetorical questions that make us ponder, wonder, and maybe think a little bit more about our interactions with them, in a sense. So it definitely reevaluates our behaviors towards those entities.
But I also find it very interesting how you tie this inverted world, how you bring it in, that it is considered like this other edge of something else, or the other sort of possibility of something else, where it is still possible to create this patriarchal, this father figure of birthing. And because this also comes into question, to what extent is it the human creating, as with the reference to the mouse and the maze, or is it something else that is making us create, or is instantiating itself through our presence?
And I think it was also very visible in our collaboration, right? It was very organic. Yes, it started with a dream, we started with the story, but as it all evolved, it was actually interaction between us three and the agents, because the story was almost like generating itself on the go, with reflection of your reaction to what was happening on a kind of technical level, and then our interaction to your new words that you additionally wrote for the actual videos. So already that sort of co-creation or co-individuation was really beautiful. It's really almost like a very novel way of approaching collective artwork in that sense.
This reminds me of a story that I was reading. I'm afraid I can't remember the name of it, but it's detailing how there are these shellfish that are in love with each other, and they create more beautiful, intricate shells, but they don't have eyes to see them. And it's actually the shell, the beauty of the shell is what manifests other animals to create, to evolve to have eyes. Because if there is nothing beautiful to see, then there's no point in having eyes in the first place. So it's the thing that we perceive as the passive thing, which is actually the thing that has the most effective power in changing its environment. And the shellfish is also something that belongs to the sea, right? And I kind of imagined this concept of the ocean here as like a space that people run back to in the fear of a non-human future, like a desire to revert to a more, well, a less conscious stage of existence. And that also then kind of being just a mere fantasy. And even if you do try to go back to the ocean, there is still the weight and the baggage of a previous life. And so you don't really ever escape the fate of the future in that sense. I would like to move on to the next snippet now. When it came down to it, you couldn't join the ocean, even if it was where the aliens belonged. He knew that doing so would quench the fire and that he would die. Yes, he could just throw the aliens in, call it a day, and go back to the monastery and eat phoenix. He contemplated it. He walked back towards the babes. Kneeling, he stroked the more active one. It, all of a sudden, did morph into a white dagger, and in the same instance, the passive one regressed into a formless silvery globule. In great shock, you snatched his hand away and fell backwards. He thought his own eyes to deceive him, but no, the beings had transformed. So these objects that are being referred to here in the story, they're called omens, and these are, I guess, the like key objects, entities within the story of there are these, and this directly relates to the initial kind of dream that I had that informed the story, where a friend of mine who gave birth to these alien amorphic kind of creatures, and I stole them before they had a chance to realize that they had given birth to them, and this was kind of like the initial concept that I talked about with CrossLucid, and at some point in the development of the story, we actually started to generate the imagery and some videos based on the like visual text that I had created. Maybe that's something that you can explore or explain in deeper level. And there's also this, they're like twins, and one of them is more active, more conscious, more transformative, and the other one has a more lethargic sensibility. And I think for me, they sort of represent these two ideas of vacillation and making choices, and there is something about the unity of these two concepts that is pointing to the essence of the story. And it's Yu's, the main character is called Yu. Yu's desire to kind of steal this dichotomy of choice and no choice is in sense his attempt to try and escape this question of agency and of whether of making choices and not making choices, how to move into some kind of consciousness or state of existence that is not about decision making or the lack thereof.
What I find personally very interesting is how many times within the story and the different extended stories, it is not necessarily you who is making seemingly decisions around it. There are like so many different narratives or myths that run through or are communicated through someone else, or sort of like blockages of actions or promotions of actions in relation to this dilemma with this dichotomy, and also just this crazy obsession with them. They sort of like watching these patterns change because they change multiple times, and later we will probably get to the different states that they take on. And I find this actually like quite interesting from the sense that you sort of like there is never any decision or any attempt to actually like further understand them outside of the myths or stories that travel around them. So what is being given over? So by Claude, by mostly by Claude, yeah, or by the apparent sort of resonances of them. And somehow when we are in the healing spring, there is this moment when they actually pretty much like reveal themselves when they are put into water. But it's almost like not, the actual sign is not being taken on, it feels. And it sort of spoke to us from the way and direction how it's sort of like larger cultural narratives or imaginaries run through a narration, or like this collective narration, and how much they decide for us. So again, we are back to agency of how much sort of almost already even forgotten roots of myths are still having these really deep time effects on how we imagine things to emerge, or how we imagine things to, and not just things, humans as well, to be. And it's sort of this frightening, yeah, in some cases, frightening layer of to the present that it sort of really complicates that idea where a present is a sort of more yeah, generative force for possible pathways or directions in futurities. But yeah, it just really complicates it, I feel. And it's also very interesting in combination with these huge data sets, of course, related to the internet and related to in an overwhelming number to a certain part of or to certain world. And yeah, what might be the resonances of that on like a longer sort of trajectory and in influence.
Yeah, and how they in a sense also solidify our future, and what narratives are being even fed into those systems, and how we work with those systems. And very often there are some myths of ideas that are not necessarily even true, but they are being imprinted, and in that way also shaping our futurity. And how can we imagine future based on all this data, and actually also on the past, and how we can within those systems create completely new narrative that are actually breaking those ideas that we already have and know and have been perpetuating forever. Where is the glitch in the system, or what can we implement, on what sort of narrations we can weave to find new modes of storytelling.
Yeah, actually, I never asked you this question, but with there is this moment when one of the aliens, omens, turns into a dagger, and it's almost like this moment when you reconsiders a sort of like intuitive force of decision that he might put them back into the ocean and just leave, and in this moment gets fascinated by this dagger. How do you think of this specific moment?
Yeah, this was a specific moment within the dream. So I may not be the most qualified person to explain what's going on with it, but you're right in that it does, the omen does become the dagger at the very moment that you as considering to return these aliens into the ocean where for some reason or another he thinks they belong. And of course the dagger is it's a fascinating dagger, right? It's this bejeweled dagger with this amazing handle, maybe made from ivory or something like that. Ornamental in nature, and it sort of transfixes him and makes him think twice about throwing it away, because he starts to perceive them as something valuable, or maybe even useful, in both a physical, like a practical sense, but also in the symbolic sense of something having some kind of innate beauty. I don't know exactly if what the symbolism of a dagger actually means, if it has a sort of phallic component, or again it's tying into this idea of like the not trauma, but complex feelings related to fatherhood. Yeah, but I mean it's also at the same time that the other omen becomes this kind of amorphous blob, and so there's like the violent active shape, and then the kind of passive harmless substance. And so I think it has to be considered within the context of that, and how somehow there is a totality that is formed through both of these symbols.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's move on to the next one, which kind of also ties into the previous snippet. With great care and reverence, she coaxed the two omens into the palm of her hand and poured them into the spring. As soon as they touched the water, they reverted back to their original form, soft and vibrant, angelic gastropods. So this is the moment that you were talking about, how there is this moment where something about being in water is revealing some kind of truth about the omens. I never actually really paid much attention to that, but I think now that you mention it, there's something going on there, and this is the first time in the story we come across a body of water that is not the ocean, but a healing spring. And I think that in the symbolic sense, the ocean and the spring are slightly different in the way in which humans relate to them, and the spring is really like a key recurring motif in Celtic mythology. I know it also comes up in Japanese mythology as well, but there is it's not just water, it's like a purified water, a clean water that has mystical properties that are not so what's the word? Not so as like imposing as the ocean, as this kind of massive crushing force. Also like a salty kind of substance as well, right? So there's like a contaminant involved. But it's the healing spring where we've come across this character called Claude, who acts as a kind of confidant of you, and is also it's not so clear in the text, but it's at the very least this entity is like a cyborg, and has access to this huge vast resource of information that she connects to in order to try and find out what it is that these omens are, and give a little bit of advice to you as to what you're supposed to do with the omens, and the choice that is made during that experience determines the end of the story.
And it's also in a space where there are multiple other druids, as in described in the text, trying to compute their way to heaven. And that's sort of, yeah, that's why we went for to choose to deal with actually the spring as a sort of collective space within the experience, where we are, yeah, through the environment quite aware that there are more other visitors or humans inside there, and yeah, where all of that sort of like huge computation happens of the environment that we are in, or that visitors find themselves, and that is actually evolutionary from today for the next 16 months. And there's a big, yeah, like open question what we make of that environment and what we figure out of that. So what type of heaven we come to compute inside of there.
Yeah, I'm also just thinking about how the spring is the water of a spring is something that you can drink, right? Which you can't do with the ocean. So there is this, in some sense, the concept of a spring is slightly more within the realm of the human, simply because it's something that you can actually internalize, whereas you can't
Without
really
processes.
internalize the ocean. And so that creates a sort of ideal space for the contemplation of heaven, and it treating that space as a some I guess having a quality of the divine, which I think is also why it appears so much in mythology as the homes of like fairies and all sorts of idyllic creatures.
Yeah, some sort of
Okay.
sanctuary, right? Like in a sense, how we also would like the participants of the experience to interact. It's not something that you're striving for a specific goal. You know you're competing with something, or there is a certain time frame or timeline that you need to accomplish, but it's really a moment of pondering, a moment of reflection, something you discover, something you can be in the healing spring and watch it for half an hour if you feel so. So it's really a place with the idea of when we actually want our agency, when we kind of release it from ourselves, when we give it to others, when it actually exists, but also how we treat our sanctuaries. Do we actually care, and how much attention we put into them? So this kind of seeps in also into the dynamics and the kind of technicalities of the experience itself.
Let's move on to the next snippet now, which talks about another aspect of the story that we've talked about a little bit before, with the notion of the phoenix. What's that, you say? What of all the other feast-goers that partook of the phoenix's meat? Well, each and every one of them did spend the rest of their long days with a hellish and insatiable hunger, which no amount of earthly food could dispel. So this phoenix in the story, a phoenix is hunted and killed by a group of people within the monastery in which the story takes place, and they are preparing it for a feast, and all of the villagers want to eat the phoenix because they believe that it will bestow some kind of divine supernatural power onto them. And this phoenix notion was something that I really wanted to explore, and this happens more so in one of the endings of the stories, and I was very happy to be told of this book called The Phoenix Complex by CROSSLUCID, and the ideas within this text were really crucial for helping me to kind of resolve what's going on with this notion of the phoenix that came up within the dream. And it's not something that I fully understand. It's a super rich idea with lots of cultural references that come up throughout time. It's obviously that the notion of a phoenix is something that is really exciting for people. It's held our imagination for thousands of years. And it's also like a cross-cultural thing as well, and it's not exactly clear as to whether or not the phoenix as a cultural symbol has like a just one source. It may have come from multiple sources, but it's also, this ties in with how for the phoenix, or for like a phoenix-like sensibility, this idea of origin is already contested, because at once the phoenix is like a singular entity, but at the same time it is the span of all phoenixes through the power of rebirth, and through this magical ability of being able to transcend one's own body and be part of a spiritual lineage, so to speak. And it's also a key idea behind the Phoenix complex is this idea that we always believe in salvation, even in the most destructive apocalyptic times, and we seem to take that for granted, whereas it's potentially not it. We shouldn't take it for granted. If we destroy all of our natural resources and make the planet too hot, we might not get a rebirth. And however, we still cling on to this ultimate hope that even if we do mess things up beyond repair, there will be a rising from the ashes, so to speak. And in the story, the slaying of the phoenix kind of represents a kind of like a mortal sin, or some terrible thing that and the feastgoers receive this punishment of eternally being hungry for the rest of their lives. And maybe this is a punishment which happens as a result of trying to like cheat the natural pattern of the phoenix. And the phoenix, in this sense, I'm not sure if it actually experiences a rebirth because its body is separated and cut up. Maybe it gets reborn in the life of a curse for all of the people that were responsible for its unnatural death. Yeah, I wanted to ask you if there are any links between this idea of the Phoenix and the Phoenix complex, and how you've interacted with the LLMs for creating the experience of the story.
Definitely, it was something about the substrate of or the ashes of the phoenix not being fertile anymore, something that, because not necessarily only rebirth but also redeath, something that the cyclicality is not necessarily always connected to just something that's positive, but also all the kind of traumatic experiences as well, and maybe looking it from the perspective of if those narratives actually serve us, and if we want to come back to the same narratives that we have been telling each other for centuries, and what other ways, maybe through even consuming the phoenix, even if it's a curse, of breaking the cycle and breaking the narrative too, and through that pain, maybe getting into some new substrate that we need to define again, rather than constantly repeating. So that I think that's why this kind of transformative path of the part of the phoenix is so beautiful, because it never takes a form. It's always becoming, and it is in a sense of seeing how we can queer the spaces, how we can be fluid, how we can create narratives that are different and maybe more elastic than the one that are ingrained in stone and repeated for centuries.
And somehow, from Michael Murder's perspective, it is a hugely ecological story as well, really, really related to now. And to some extent, I feel the sort of like possible resolution there is a more non-dual sort of approach. But already in Cosmism, there has been a sort of rethinking and reevaluation of the phoenix with explicit celebration of its actual decay, of its actual non immolition, and a sort of like transformation through an acceptance of its own morphingness, or like, how do you say that it's change instead of, because, and it's very questionable to what extent does the Firebird actually change between these cycles. So I found that it also might be that eating it might just bring on you the punishment of those cycles never changing. And it's as sort of really comes into this question, how can we, yes, have that cyclicality possibly, but also accept our degradation, our oneness with the I don't know, like the grounds, with all of that will eat the body, all of that also eats the cultural narrative, or of that creates this more compost-like substrate instead of ash to actually grow through from. And that was I think this perspective that we felt to explore there within both of the videos, or like the sort of attractors that are informed by the various possibilities of the phoenix. And what we found extremely yeah, like you know, at some point, like, we got also in a dualistic way about this. And it has been really incredible how once we created those videos and the further narrative to the spoken language you wrote, it actually lost that duality, and it really embraced that both of these ways are ways, and it is not either or any of them. That was actually one of these moments in the creation that was literally like sent like you know when you just don't notice yourself sometimes, and it literally like sent like a whole like an electric thing across the whole body. It's like, oh, okay.
But also that none of the narratives on that, there is no like necessarily ending to a story that's one ending or that is more important than the other. There is kind of multiplicity in endings, and there's just pathways we can take or that we are taken to, because very often maybe we don't have our own agency, but there is no one narrative that's more important than the other.
Yeah. I know we're pushed for time right now. I would love to respond to that, but we still have 2 snippets, and I think perhaps we should go through them both, and also we did actually intend for the final snippet to be more of like a contemplative one, which introduces us into the experience. So I will just also add the penultimate snippet into that experience for everyone as well.
Because I think if we start into that, that's probably like a 30-minute one. We
Yeah,
can still
exactly.
share reference.
Okay. The Omen's sweet song, now amplified into a choir, like his blood was invigorated by the living water. This was the vindication he long sought. A return back to the genesis point of the spiral, a name called oblivion, a game called nature. And it is said that nature loves to hide. And so he went to kill nature with his mind's hunting pike, to be no more, to be no more. He went forth, bleeding as he stepped on cracked shell and glass. It was all right. Where he was going, he needed not feet. He needed to be like the omens. He longed for fins, those primordial, undifferentiated appendages that are more perfect than the mammal's hand. And the moon broke through the storm and the clouds, and did shine exceedingly bright, so as to blind Claude's eyes. She recoiled from you, and the light formed an apotropaic barrier that split the 2 apart. The tranquil moon compelled the ocean to be stilled. You was free to go, and so he did. It was the first time he had ever seen a clear ocean, an ocean without those myriad and inert and discarded mirrors. Trash, the water sucking at his shoulders. He let the omens out of the bundle. Home at last. Respite at last. He had the feeling the monastery was being destroyed in a ferocious fire, but that was so far away now. It was just the water and the blood, and they would soon become one. He submerged himself. All right, that's the end of the discussion. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you everyone for
Thank you,
listening,
everyone,
and
for
thank you Orion for this, and Barbara for this, and LAS for this really incredibly beautiful collaboration and co-creation.
Thank you so much. Please join now. I'm gonna just, if someone has missed it, I'm gonna put the link here in the chat with the link so you could go to the experience. And please now, it'd be great as many as we could get, as the experience changes depending on the amount of people that that participates. So the more people that will be there, we will have different experience. If you go later today, you will have probably something completely different. So please blast your speakers, be ready for this amazing experience. and we'll see each other in the comfort of our laptops, and let's become you. Okay, bye-bye.
The other side.
Ciao, ciao.